but it is one of the reasons is because our own Mount Albion near Hamilton was 100% a dumping ground. And it's kind of the same idea. It's like a remote location away from the city, but not too far. Has forests around it, so you have a lot of place to hide. It also has a cemetery, so you could add bodies to a cemetery and nobody'd be the wiser. So that got me thinking of towards it. But when it comes down to it, Bachelor's Grove Cemetery is an amazingly historic place, and I'm glad it's still around today. But what about the ghost, Daniel? Just get to the gosh darn ghost, Daniel. All right. Calm down. It's all right. And it's haunted. I mean, my goodness, this place has had ghost stories surrounding it. It's part of the history since the 1950s. So what is that, like 70 years now? People have talked about the ghost stories inside the place. And one of the main ones is known as the Madonna. Now, not the singer, of course. We're talking about the Madonna ghost photo of a woman sitting on a gravestone. So that is one of the most famous ghost photos in the entire world. And this is where it comes from. Now, it's taken by a paranormal investigator. It was a group known as the Ghost Research Society. I believe they were out of Chicago. And a former member named Jude Fells. They went out there and took the photo in 1991. So supposedly it was a very zoomed out shot standing near the gate of the cemetery. And then they noticed the anomaly, and the ghost photo today is zoomed in. So that's why it's kind of grainy, kind of blurry, is because it was from a zoomed out and they zoomed in on the ghost. Now, we got to just keep inside as a little side note when it comes to the validity of the ghost photo. You do need to keep in mind that the Ghost Research Society in the late 80s, early 90s, was the main society for Chicago back then. It was a fellow who he got some fame after this, Dale Kaczmarek. You might have heard the name. He was the president of the same society where this Jude Felts was a member. So, I mean, I ask the question from a logical standpoint, is they would have any motivation to fake such a photo? And I would say yes. Not a ton of motivation, because it does say former member. So maybe there wasn't a ton of motivation to do this, but in the sense of needing to gain fame from something ghostly, there's motivation. So I say take it with a grain of salt, even though I think a lot of the experiences that people have had there over the years are definitely legit. I would say the ghost photo, I would wonder just from that point of view. But the ghost of the Madonna, the ghost of the woman, has been seen. So there's many experiences of seeing a woman in a white dress inside of the burial ground. And there's a great quote from a book, and I'll just say it is, it's like the feeling of when she's seen. The quote says, "There's an urgency in her manner as she wanders about searching through the tombstones for a lost treasure or person." Now, some have said they've seen her holding a baby. This has been talked about since the 1970s. The original experience was seeing what they thought was a monk. I guess maybe they saw the dress and thought it was robes, and they said the monk was holding the baby, which actually gives some validity to it. So the late 70s, that was the first experience of seeing a monk holding a baby, and then later on they said, no, it's a woman in a white dress. So it tells me that, okay, the original one, it can't, in a way it can't be faked, in the sense that they didn't say it was a woman. They said it was a monk. So that reason, it gives me some validity to it. I think that's kind of cool. Now, the woman wasn't just a woman. They actually called her Mrs. Rogers. Now, I did some digging, and I found out that the Mrs. Rogers name comes from a woman who's actually buried in the graveyard. Her name is Luella Rogers. She's buried in Lot 15 next to a tombstone, a very mysterious one. It's just a small gravestone that says very simply, "Infant Daughter" on it. So some say that maybe the Mrs. Rogers comes from a legend that she is the Madonna, that Luella Rogers is the Madonna, that they see her holding the baby. So the story is that she's wandering the cemetery. Sometimes she's alone, sometimes she's holding the child. but that she's always searching for her child's ghost, her child's spirit / energy, or that maybe she's wandering on her own and the baby has moved on, but she hasn't. That's the tragic legend behind it. Now, I will say, though, this has a kind of a disproven piece to it, that a historian, I mean, this is the beauty. I love Americans so much. If Americans are listening, I love you guys, because I love how serious you take ghost stories. Because here in Canada, they would never do something as try and research the history to see if a legend is true. But you guys would do that. Here in Canada, they're like, ghosts aren't real. And you say, why aren't ghosts real? And they're like, I don't know, science. But down in the United States, they're like, we want to prove this to be real. So a historian down near Chicago actually looked into this and said, okay, we got the infant daughter stone. There's got to be some kind of history to that. And they actually found it. Goes back to the turbulent times of the 60s and the 70s. And I was saying the stones were being destroyed. The stones were being stolen. And one of the stones that was stolen was of a young girl named Emma Fulton. So Emma Fulton, part of the Fulton family, who's buried on the opposite side of Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. So what we had here was a stone that was placed down to replace a stolen one, but whoever put the replacement in is said to have made a mistake. That for some reason he thought it was supposed to go with the Rogers family, but it meant to go with the Fulton family. So they say that the stone is put down, but that there is no child buried underneath it. So that's what they say. So the historian kind of disproved it, said, okay, if Luella Rogers is the Madonna and she's searching for her baby, well, there's really no baby there. Then maybe in that sense it's been kind of disproven. But we haven't disproven that the woman is there. Tons of experiences with that woman. And with the ghost photo itself, I will link to the Ghost Walks article that shows. We actually have an article that has like the top 10 ghost photos. You can peruse that. That'll be in the description. As well, I'm sure I'll make the thumbnail of this episode, the woman, because that's just what needs to happen.